All right, everyone. So I typically hate to begin a chapter lecture via Google Classroom, but with today's posted assignment, there really just wasn't any way around it. So I wanted to go ahead and post the first copy of this lecture just to kind of keep us moving with the hope that maybe we can get to World War I, World War II by May 7th. So today we're moving into the chapter on European imperialism. And typically, when we think about imperialism, we think exclusively Africa. Those are the pictures that loom to mind. It's what American textbooks tend to focus on. But we really want to be pushing the fact that while Africa was obviously a huge target for European imperialism, um, a huge amount of it was also occurring in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and um, the Pacific, Oceania. So let's begin here and start with the question, how did the Industrial Revolution impact Europe's interaction with the world? And as I told you a couple chapters ago, the Industrial Revolution, or I guess that was last chapter, the Industrial Revolution is the most important event in our course, really, um, since the agricultural revolution, and it impacts everything that comes after, including imperialism. So first, we know that the Industrial Revolution greatly fueled Europe's decision to expand internationally and seek colonies. The factories of the Industrial Revolution were running 24/7, 365. And the thing about factories that run 24/7, 365 is that they need a lot of raw materials in order to keep them running. They need rubber, they need iron to produce steel, they need copper, they need wood, they need all kinds of raw materials. And sadly, the British Isles and Germany and all those places is not going to be able to produce enough. And so Europe began what was already a pursuit for colonies. With North America and India, they began to expand on a huger level, much bigger level. Um, and in addition to the raw materials to power the factories, European capitalists, manufacturers, also realized that they had quickly saturated the European marketplace, right? If you're a factory producing bicycles, how many years can you be producing bicycles at record speed before everyone in England and everyone in Europe already has a bicycle? And so you're out of customers. And so they're needing markets, international markets especially, in order to sell European products. So when you get a new colony, not only do you get all the raw materials from that colony, but then you get to sell them back, the things you make, and profit double. As Europe was dealing with rising populations, and much larger numbers of unemployed workers due to the shift away from agriculture, which had dominated the European economy for 1,000 years. What we found was that the foreign markets and India and Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands and Sub-Saharan Africa buying things produced in European factories was allowing countries like England to keep their workers employed, um, which was a huge thing because with socialism and Marxism knocking on the door, right, the ability to keep workers employed was seen by many European governments, England included, as a major strategy in the war, so to speak, the war of minds um, against socialism. Apologies, I was having trouble with my recorder. And so, as this push by European countries, specifically France and England and Germany, to look for colonies around the world became known as a policy of imperialism. The word imperial meaning, just like in Star Wars, empire, right? And imperialism was this belief that you could extend a country's power and influence around the world. You could increase a country's power and influence um, by basically committing military to far off places in order to kind of expand your holdings through diplomacy and military force. And so all of these European capitalists, these factory owners, that the Industrial Revolution was sort of seeming to generate by the dozen every single day. These European capitalists making money hand over fist were basically using their profits to invest in greater profit opportunities abroad. And so, they're getting money from selling products in sub-Saharan Africa and then putting that money directly back in to profit making ventures in India. Um, and so, imperialism starts to take off to fuel um, the need of industrial revolution societies for raw materials and new markets. And this alone probably would have greatly enhanced or expanded the rate at which European nations were seeking colonies. But we also have to talk about nationalism, right? Nationalism is not just a love of one's country, but like a super love of one's country, right? We're talking about like American flag jumpsuit at the, state fair screaming America every 5 second kind of love of your country. And so what we saw along with the Industrial Revolution was this great rise in nationalism in countries all across Europe, right? This belief that the money that was being produced, the wealth that was being generated, the power that was being produced of these countries was leading to the like notions of exceptionalism, right? British people were saying Britain is the best, everyone else sucks. Germans were saying Germany's the best, everyone else sucks. The French were saying French is the best, or France is the best, everyone else sucks. And so this rising nationalism in Europe was kind of fueled by all the wealth created by the Industrial Revolution. And one of the ways that European countries got to kind of keep score in this nationalist duel was how many colonies you had, right? The more colonies you had, the more you could kind of say, well, look how great we are. We have 47 country, or colonies, and Germany would say, well, we have 48, and France would say, well, we have 52. And England would say, well, we have 65. And so the pursuit of colonies became a part of this nationalism debate sort of all across Europe, to the point where countries in Europe, especially, started to collect colonies, even if they made them no money, right? Even if like a little island in the middle of the South Pacific was not going to generate any money because it was too far away to get your products to and didn't make sense to ship all the natural resources, they still kept it because it was, like I said, part of your scorecard. Also, it should be said that the technological developments of the Industrial Revolution were really critical to the imperial expansion, right? In order to conquer most of sub-Saharan Africa by Britain and France, we had to be able to get to it faster. And more than just being able to get to it faster with steamships, we also had to be able to communicate with it. And so these Industrial Revolution developments were what made conquering of sub-Saharan Africa especially possible, right? We saw the steamships that not only could travel in open oceans and get you there in, basically 10 times the speed without relying on winds, but also you could drive a steamship against the current up rivers, which was incredibly difficult to do if you were using a wind-powered vessel. And so steamships gave access to the interior lands of the continent because you could use them to basically travel up the great rivers of Africa and Southeast Asia in order to conquer the interior lands, which had mostly been off limits to Europeans for quite some time. We also saw the underwater telegraph, which is you run basically telegraph lines coming out of London and Paris and Berlin, all over the place, where you could beep 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 transmit messages around the globe using those beeps and stops to tell your generals or governors what you want to do. And if they were facing a dilemma, they could quickly radio home and get advice or support. We saw medical advancements, not just in antiseptics and antibiotics, but also things like quinine, right, which was discovered during the Industrial Revolution, which is a treatment against malaria. Not that it stops you from getting malaria, but now you won't die from it. And so now you can use a steamship to go up the Congo River, and then when you get off the boat and you get eaten alive by mosquitoes, you won't die. And you can radio home to talk about all the gold you found. And then, arguably most important, although I don't know, the steamships are pretty darn important too, was the weapon technology advancements, which is no surprise given what we know about Europeans. But the power of the Industrial Revolution technological development was put towards developing better rifles and even early machine guns. And this quote here from Kipling is really exemplifying what we're talking about, right? Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. And you can see them here, right? The Maxim gun is in the top right. You'd have basically chains of bullets that you could pull through a pop, 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 pop thing by turning a crank and fire, bullets at speeds unheard of to allow you to mow down entire armies without needing to reload. The repeating rifle down at the bottom is something that replaced the musket where you had to put a little cannonball or a little musket ball in with a little bit of black powder and then pull it back and then fire, and then if you miss it's another 45 seconds to reload again. You can see an early telegraph register down there in the bottom right next to quinine. And so, what follows again is that grab bag scenario that we see in the cartoon in the bottom left, right, with Russia grabbing the lands of northern Asia and Siberia, and British grabbing India, and Germany playing along in the eastern coast of Africa and vice versa. And so let's keep going. How did the industrial advancements change the way that Europe saw the world? And the first question was, or the first answer, if I can get this to stop here, weird, is that the development of the Industrial Revolution, which was kind of fueling the birth of modern science going along with the scientific revolution, started to basically turn into kind of an abuse of science, where once you've industrialized, you look at the rest of the world as others, right? They are backwards people. They are not nearly as advanced as us. They're not nearly as great as us. And so these non-industrialized science or societies became othered. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, really that identity of an other was really reserved for religious terms, right? Like we're Catholic, they're not. We're Christian, they're not. But now it became othered according to industrialization. Prior to the industrialization, we had seen European societies really embrace a lot of foreign ideas and techniques. I mean, God knows we've talked in this class a lot about what comes out of China and India and the Middle East that has shaped human development and really, for a while, led human development. And so Europe, who had largely embraced international developments for 1,000 years, is suddenly starting to look at these same societies that drove them to this position as the backwards societies. They did continue to mingle freely with the Asian and African elites, but all kind of leading towards this like arrogance of Europeans, right? That Europeans are somehow more evolved, that they are smarter, that they industrialize not because of geographic luck or historical context or friendly business arrangements like we talked about in the last chapter, but they industrialized because they were just smarter, right? Genetically superior. And this essentially combined with feelings of religious superiority to kind of give rise to basically a new kind of racism, right? A racism that used modern science to validate the racial preferences that we saw in the transatlantic slave trade, but now we're going to try to use, industrialized science to prove it, to basically justify our treatment of sub-Saharan Africa, India, and all that, because they're lesser creatures and they need us to kind of keep them protected and to kind of save them from themselves. Um, the theory that comes out of it is something called social Darwinism. Darwin being a chief Origin of the Species biological evolutionary thinker, starting to apply those biological evolution to humans to justify racial superiority.